What's up, guys? Welcome to another phone episode, annual pro mode episode. So if you're new to the channel, I do the pro mode stuff pretty much with every release, except I didn't do it for the S22. But today I'm going to walk you through the S23 Ultra Pro mode, and this should apply to the S23, to all variants of the S23. The Pro mode, the software should be the same. The only differences we're going to see would be lens differences. So let me get set up. Oh, and real quick, I'm just throw this out there. A lot of people ask me on my phone videos how I'm attaching to the tripod. So I figured I'd show you guys real quick, because Peak Design just got these new cases in for the S23, and they are amazing because they just clip right in to their little hangy thing, and I absolutely love them. These things are not coming off. You could shake this as hard as you want, it's not coming off. So I love the Peak Design system. It's not sponsored at all in any way, shape, or form. This is just the stuff that I use. But the Peak Design stuff, all those accessories are in the links below. Enough of that. Let's get set up before we lose the best light, because we have some beautiful evening light. So I'm going to show you guys how I use Pro mode and all of the inner workings, the features, functions, all of that good stuff. All right, so let's just jump right in here to the camera. And by default, we're in photo mode. So the first thing is you'll see you've got these guys here that you can swipe through. But if you go to here to more and you don't see it, you can select it. So you can, Expert RAW mode is now inside of the camera app on the S22 Ultra, and before you used to have to download Expert RAW separately in the Samsung app, but now you don't have to, so now it's right here. So everything that we're going to go over in Pro mode applies to Expert RAW as well, because there's no difference except for the bit depth that the image is recorded in, and the Astro mode. We'll go over that in a little bit though, so I'm going to back out of that. And I'm just going to, I've already got Pro mode here in my thingy, so I'm just going to swing over to Pro mode, and we're going to get started. So what is Pro mode good for? Pro mode is good for letting you take control of your exposure in the exposure triangle, except for, so in this we have shutter speed, we have ISO, and we have aperture. In the phones though, we don't have aperture. That's a fixed aperture. That means you can't change the diameter of the blades inside like a normal lens. So we still have shutter speed and ISO. So let's go over shutter speed first. To make this easier, I'm just going to put this in autofocus there so that we can see, so I don't have to fiddle with that. All right, so the first thing, like, why would you want to take exposure into your own hands? So for me personally, I love having control of my shutter for long exposures, for astro, for waterfalls, you know, that kind of thing, night stuff. It's really great. But if even during the day, if for any reason you want to learn photography or just have control and not let the phone do everything, then this is our jam. So we've got it here, and you can see it. It says A and then 1/60. So that means that it's in auto right now. So if I move that, the A goes away, meaning that now I have full control. It's full manual. And now you'll see as I scroll through this, we're changing the exposure. So a shorter shutter speed. If you guys want to know more about shutter speed and ISO, I have videos on those explaining like the breakdowns of how they affect photography and exposure triangles. But for now, let's just suffice to say that the faster the shutter speed, the less light you're letting in, and the less time the shutter's open. The longer the shutter speed, the more light you're letting in, and the longer the shutter is actually open. So we can go all the way from 1/2000th of a second, and you'll notice that we're still seeing something on the screen because I'm in auto ISO. So it's adjusting the auto ISO. So let's take that into manual ISO. And then I'm going to scroll down to the base ISO, which is 50. So now if I adjust, so now it's looking pure black. That means that there's not enough light coming in, and if we take the shot, we're just going to get a black shot. So that means we need to increase our shutter speed. So as we do that, and we're getting a longer and longer shutter speed, now look at this, it's pure white, so it goes up to 30 seconds. So that means if you see pure white, a lot of people ask me when I do my Milky Way or Astro stuff with the phones, hey, I did the same settings as you and it came out pure white. Well, that's because you had too much light in your scene, even though you may have thought it was dark out. Maybe you had a lot of light pollution, whatever it is. That means you need to just back it down until we can actually see stuff. So now we're getting in. And I'm looking at the highlights. Phones can't handle highlights very well, especially if you're not in the regular mode where it does HDR and JPEG processing and all of that stuff. With the raw, with the pro mode, you got to deal with this. It's not going to do any HDR for you. So that leads me to one other thing. Let's go into here real quick. Let's go into settings and let's go to make sure your scene optimizer is turned off, although I don't think you can mess with that in pro mode. But let's go into advanced picture options and make sure that this RAW plus JPEG or RAW is turned on. I like the RAW plus JPEG because sometimes I just want the JPEG that I can have and post real quick or whatever, and then having the RAW means that I can edit it either on the phone or in Photoshop or whatever on the computer you want to use. So make sure that the RAW is turned on so you get the most out of your pro mode, because that's pretty much the whole point of pro mode, other than the controls, is having the ability to have the raw images. Okay, so enough about shutter speed. Let's go to ISO. So ISO here, again, I'm not going to go into what ISO is. If you don't know and you want to learn, I have a whole video on what ISO is and how it works. But basically, it's the sensitivity of your sensor. So the lower the ISO, the less sensitive, and this is a very, very condensed version of ISO, but the higher the ISO, as we go up, you'll see the same thing happens as did with shutter speed. It's getting brighter and brighter until it's completely bright. That's because it goes up to ISO 3200, which means we have a very sensitive sensor right now. So the other thing with ISO that we're really careful of, really cognizant of, especially with phones, is that ISO also increases something called noise, and that's all the artifacting and the digital yuckiness that you see in some images, especially at nighttime. All cameras are susceptible to noise because it's a digital thing. So the phones don't do a very good job of dealing with high noise and high ISO. So we like to keep that low if possible. Now, when we do Astro stuff and do Milky Way stuff, high ISO is unavoidable. On these phones, I don't like to go past 1600 or so, and that's really pushing it. But I have videos on Milky Way and Astro. You can go check those out separately. So just know that the higher ISO, the more noise you're going to have, especially if it's low light, and the more brightness you're going to have for your exposure. So next thing up here is right here in the center on the right above this next to this 500 to the left of it, you'll see an EV. You see that red EV and how it's lit and it says plus 2.0? That is the exposure value, and that's the camera is telling me that it's red, and it's telling me that I'm overexposed by more than 2 stops of light. So as I back this down, it's going to change, and now it says 1.7, 1.3, 1.0, 0.3, 0.7, 0.3. And now at the base ISO, it's still saying that I'm a third of a stop overexposed. But that's just what the camera thinks is overexposed because of the metering modes. So we're going to talk about metering modes next. So don't use that as a super guide for accurate exposure. But it can help in a pinch if the camera thinks that you're either under or over. Because if we go back into shutter speed and I start changing this, now you'll see it says negative, the EV, and it says negative 1.3. negative 2.0. Now it thinks that I'm 2 stops underexposed. But the problem is we have a real big dichotomy between the overexposed areas, the sky, and then the shadowy bits down here, and that's going to throw off your exposure. So don't pay attention to that as much. So let's go to focusing now. So we have the ability to control focus or have it do autofocus, and that's really cool. And they've added these extra points now. These didn't used to be here even in the last iteration on the S22. So now we have center, multi, or manual. So basically, if we click the center, that means that it will autofocus to the center of the screen. If we click, whoa, where'd it go? If we click multi, that means it's going to focus, autofocus within these little focus points that have just popped up now. And then if we click manual, now we can manually adjust that. And the cool thing is, you see the green highlights there. That's called focus peaking. And that's letting me know what parts of the image are in focus. So now you can't see anything, but if I put my hand out here, it's going to tell me when my hand is in focus. So that's pretty handy. And now if I remove it and I want to get the background in focus, now it's going to show me where the background. So it used to have a little infinity sign, but infinity signs just, they're not very accurate. So we don't trust that. So don't trust that all the way out like this is focused on infinity, like the stars or whatever, because you'll notice that the background, the mountains are blurry all the way at 1.0. So that should be infinity. So we want to back it down until it shows us that those mountains and the little town right there are in focus. So now we have what I would consider proper focus if I wanted to take a shot out there of the mountains and everything. So that's our focusing bit. So let's move over here and let's talk about a couple of these other things. So then we have the flash, of course. You can turn that on or off. In auto mode, the flash may be in auto, but in pro mode, it's either on or off. There is no auto because you're controlling it. So you're deciding if you want it on or not. Then we have the timers. So there's a lot of ways to do hands-free photo taking on this. The timer is the traditional one, so you can set it for a 2, 5, or 10-second timer, and it will take the photo after that time. And that's great for if you want to reduce tripod shake. That's great for if you need to run out in front and you want to be in the image and you set it to a 10-second timer. But you can also set it to, if you come in here, you can also go to shooting methods, and we can click that, and we can turn on voice commands so that if I tell it to say any of these things, it'll do it, or if I tell it to show my palm, then both of those will activate the shutter. You can also use the S Pen if you want to click and run away. Oh, by the way, real quick, the Peak Design, because this is magnetic, the S22 version of this, it didn't work with the S Pen, but the S Pen does work now most of the time. Camera Lady said hers is a little bit iffy, but it still works, like to draw and use the S Pen on the screen because of the magnet. So I don't know how they figured that out, but I'm glad they did. That's just a quick little side note. So let's go into here to the next thing. You'll see this 4:3. By default, it's going to be set to 4:3 because that's the ratio. 4:3 is the ratio of the sensor size. And that's really important because if you want your full sensor, if you want the image with the best resolution and the full sensor size, then you need to be in 4:3. So the sun is now dipped and now the exposure is changing. So we're getting into blue hour, which is a good time to use pro mode actually. So if we go up here to 16:9, then that'll give you a 16:9 ratio, but that's a crop in. Every one of these is a crop, even when it says, so 1:1, if you want to do Instagram, that's fine. But full, it says full, and that's misleading because people might tend to think that that's the full sensor, but it's not. This is full resolution of the screen, which is like 18:9. I don't know what the resolution of the screen is, but it's wider than 16:9. But it's cropping in on the sensor. It's cropping in these top bits in to get to that. So we don't want that. So I want 4:3. You'll also notice that now they have included a 4:3 50 megapixels. So the S23 has the ability to do the 200 megapixel, but only in regular mode. It cannot do that in pro mode. It only has the 50. So that's a little wonky too. And that's unfortunate for people who want to do pro mode and have the highest resolution possible. 4:3 and 50 is going to be your jam for that. Oh, and then there's white balance up here. Let's go back real quick. So white balance is color temperature, and that's going to determine the temperature, and we're using kelvins here. So I have another whole video explaining like the theories and science behind white balance if you want to know what that is. But basically, if I change this, it's going to warm it up. If I increase it, and if I decrease it, it's going to cool it down. So if you have a really warm scene, then you want to change it to where you want to cool it off to where it balances to where the whites look white. That's what white balance means. So we can mess with that. And if you want to be stylistic, then you can. You have control over that. Let's move up here to metering modes. Let me go ahead and bring up some brightness there. So this guy here on the second to top left is your metering modes. So now we have center weighted metering, which is, it's going to, when it says metering, that means that when it's calculating the exposure, it's going to use the center part of the image. So if you have an image that's tightly cropped into something and it's all averaged out, then that's a good thing to use there. If you have a general landscape like this, then I would go with matrix metering, which is going to use more, it's going to use the full sensor there and the full focal length and scene to meter, and it's going to average that out. So there's really high spots in the clouds and there's really dark spots in these shadows, and it's going to use all those and average out in the middle and say, this is where I think your exposure should be. And that's where you're going to have problems, because something is either going to be too dark or too overexposed when you have those high dynamic range scenes. The next thing is spot metering. So this is really good for if you're shooting with the sun to your subject's back, because otherwise it's going to meter for the sun and make your subject really dark. So if you have it in spot metering, then you can put it on your subject, which may be a person or an animal or whatever, or a small thing in the frame, and it'll meter for that. Everything else will be overexposed, but that should theoretically be okay because your subject will be properly exposed. For most things, I would say just leave it in matrix metering because it does a fairly good job, especially if you want like landscapes and stuff like this. Okay, the last thing up here on the left is something that I just don't ever use personally, but and there's a reason for that. These are, you'll see we have contrast, highlights, shadows, saturation, and tint. So we can adjust all of these to make the image stylized however we want. And then we can create a picture profile. But the problem is you can't, it's kind of like creating a preset, but on the phone it doesn't really save those to presets and it bakes that into the image. So I would rather do all of that in post. All right, so that's pretty much everything in the Pro mode. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Pro video mode, because they've separated that now and there's not too much difference here, but I really like some of these new features that they've put in. So again, let's go, just fix our exposure here. So everything is the same for the controls. All right, so we have autofocus, which is great. We have, let's get out of that. So we have our basic ISO, same deal, brighten it up. We want to keep the ISO as low as we can for as long as possible. We have our shutter speed. We want to keep that as our 180 rule, which means we want our shutter speed at twice what our filming frames per second are. So you'll see that here. We can, in this one, I leave it in 16:9 because that, for filming, for video, that's native. That's what we use, you know, for YouTube and for movies and all that stuff. So I actually do leave it in 16:9 for that. And then let's go up here to the filming format. So this is nice. This is so great in that Samsung has included this now, that we have 4K 24 frames a second, which is standard for Hollywood and movies and all of that kind of stuff. And that's great. And then we have 30, 60, so we can do 4K 60 if you want to slow it down. If we do that though, keeping the 180 rule, I want to increase it to 1/125th. It should be 1/120th, but that's the closest we can get with the shutter speed there. So that means that I can film something, and then if I want to slow it down in post, I'll be able to do that, and that's awesome. But you'll notice that that dropped, so this is where Pro Mode comes in handy, and I want to bring my ISO up until, you know, I'm exposed again, and it's just going to keep getting darker and darker out here because it's nighttime now. And now the great thing is we have 8K 24, so that's really cool that we can do 8K. That'll allow me to really punch in if I want to. And then we have 8K 30, which is even better. So if we want just a lot of TV and YouTube and stuff like that is starting to film in 30 more. So that's great. We still don't have 8K 60, but that's okay. So these are the modes. Depending on what I do, if you want, we have full HD, which is 1080p 120. So then I would need to go in my shutter speed to 250th or maybe 180th, but I would caution on the other side of that and do 250th. Bring my ISO up. So that's if I wanted, but I only like to film in 4K now, so I'm going to leave it on that. 4K 24 means that I can bring my shutter speed back down to 150th, which means I can bring my ISO down, which means I won't have such a noisy looking video or image. Same thing here, not available, so in the current video size, that's interesting. So that means they're probably only available in FHD 30, look at that, is there. But I don't care about full, and I don't care about those, so I'm not going to mess with that. So the other cool thing that they've added recently is you'll see on the bottom left, you'll see the LR and the thingies bouncing up and down. So that's my mic. So I have it, rear mic focuses on sounds coming towards the back of the phone. That's amazing. And if I want to switch it to front mic where I'm talking now, you'll see it change. And then now I can control the gain, and then it will hopefully pick up, but this will be better if you plug something in. Like even the lav mics that I'm using right now, you can plug into these, you know, and have the wireless, or you can plug the shotgun mic in. And now that you have the gain control on here and the ability to switch between front and rear microphones, that's amazing. That's a really good thing. So having the microphone controls, like having access to both microphones, both front and rear, and having access to the gain control for both of them is a much needed improvement. So I'm very excited about that. You can also have it set to Omni, which will do both. It'll record from both directions. So that's really handy if you want to vlog, or if you've got people talking on both sides, or if you just want all around ambient, you know, that's really great. So then you'll see here, because like I said earlier, you can put a USB. It's grayed out right now because there's nothing plugged in. But if you have a shotgun mic or a lav mic like this plugged into the USB, it will then give you access to that, and you can control that. Same with Bluetooth. All of those are much needed, and I'm super stoked that they've added that stuff in there. So let's go into the settings real quick, and I want to make sure too that the S23 has amazing stabilization. So I'm going to turn that on in here. So I'm going to make sure that that's turned on in here. That way if I'm walking around or whatever. And then I also like to turn on grid lines for both photos and videos. That way I can keep my subjects lined up where I want them. So that should do it for the Pro Video mode. Let's go back into the Pro mode here. So now we're getting some nice blue hour stuff. So let me just take, oh, and let me go over this real quick since I went over all the settings. So you'll notice that we have the UW, the W, the T, and the ST over here on the right. So those are access to your lenses. Traditionally, Samsung didn't give you access to all of the lenses, but now they do. So we're in Pro mode. We have the ultra wide. We are in the wide, which is the regular, the best sensor, and the telephoto, and then the super telephoto. So that's way up in something's grill out there. So I would advise for the best sensor quality, best dynamic range, all of that stuff, leave it in wide if you can. But you'll notice too, when we switch, I really love switching the telephoto. So let's find something like there. That's not the best composition in the world, but let's say we want to get my beautiful little mountain town, Silver City, and Western New Mexico University in there, and then the wonderful Gila Forest in the background. So I'm on my telephoto. Every time you switch lenses, you will notice that it saves the values for that lens. So if I switch now, you'll notice that things are changing. The exposures are changing. So let's say I want to mess with this now, then I'm going to change it. And whatever I change it to, if I jump away and then come back to it, it'll stay. So that's nice that it stays per lens. Because as you change your focal length, you're going to change the exposure that you need to be every time. So there we are, and I can take that shot, and there it is. And then if we back out of that, so if we come in here to the super telephoto, oh, that's horrible. So this is 10x, so let's see if we can focus on something. Let's go with the bell tower right there on campus. So now we need to, the first thing obviously we need to fix is the focus. So it really does not want to focus. There we go. So I had to put it in multi and let it pick something. But we can also go through and really tighten that down. Yeah, that's true. Camera lady said about it's getting dark. The super telephoto is obviously the worst telephoto lens, the worst lens on here. And the more in focal length, this is true to any camera, but especially true with the phones. The longer the focal length, the more you're going to struggle with low light. So the sooner it's going to get darker and that thing because you have such a long focal length. So now the sun has gone down. We have very little. And look at that, it put it up to 3200. So I'm going to drop this down to 50 and then I'm going to open my shutter way, way up. Look at that. That's saying that I need 30 seconds. Oh, that's saying it's +2 over, but it's not reflecting that on the back of the screen. So let's go to, so it's saying right there at 1 second. Oh, now it changed to I'm under. So 2 seconds, now it's saying that I'm right on. So let's take that shot and hold it very still because long photo. All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. It's getting dark. I gotta hike back to my car. But basically, if you wanna see some more stuff on how I use Pro Mode, I've already showed you guys some of these images here I've captured with the S23 and the S22 and a couple of older, maybe even the S21. I don't know what images I'm putting up, but they've all been on Samsung phones and I love doing astro. So I'm gonna have more stuff with astro. I'm gonna show you guys how to do some star trails and some Pro Mode time lapses and all of that stuff. We're about to go do the Milky Way with the S23 Ultra, which I haven't done yet. But if you want to satiate yourself for some, you can't wait for any of that, go check out my S22 stuff and you'll see all of how I do the astro, the Milky Way, the time lapses, all that good stuff. But all that's coming for the S23 Ultra. So let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave those down below, and I will see you in the next episodes. Check out all the accessory stuff if you want some cool tripods and cases and all of those goodies down below. And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.